two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Eric Cheyfitz. He is now retired from Cornell, where he held, it sounded like, several positions. Indigenous studies, I think also Near Eastern, right?
Well, my indigenous studies intersected with Near Eastern studies because Palestinians are considered by many of us who work in the field the indigenous people of Palestine.
And we are going to be talking about Israel, Palestine, and academic freedom because Professor Cheyfitz got into all sorts of trouble with Cornell administration for things that he said and did, but mostly, I think, said. Well, there was a bit of did also. Or
Yeah, those two things come together. It really focuses on the course I taught, Gaza indigeneity and resistance in the spring semester 2025.
Eric Cheyfitz, please tell us what is your case and how did it come about?
Right. Well, I should say that according to the agreement I finally reached with Cornell, I am not yet retired. I am on a paid leave till June of 2026 when I had planned to retire anyway, and I will retire formally at that point. This case began in 2024, just before the spring semester actually started in 2025, when I proposed a course called Gaza Indigeneity and Resistance. This course was passed by the College of Agriculture and Life Science Faculty Committee, as is the routine. And there was a description of the course, really a two-sentence description that was posted. And that description caught the attention of adjunct professor in the law school, Menachem Rosensaft, and he complained to then interim president, now President Michael Kotlikoff. He felt the course, although I don't know how he could assume what the course was from a two-sentence description, but because Gaza was mentioned, I think, and that is a trigger certainly for pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist factions. He complained about that the course was going to be biased and was going to be a sort of pro-Hamas course, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was sort of wild speculation, none of which was true. And Kotlikoff concurred with him, having just read two sentences. And then Rosensaft went to the Jewish press and quoted Kotlikoff about the course. So I was contacted by the Jewish press and I responded. Those responses are on the record, obviously, in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. I think the Jerusalem Post reprinted it. Inside Higher Ed reprinted the story. It got a lot of coverage. And it was a violation by Kotlikoff of academic freedom policies, which says that administrators are not supposed to be commenting on faculty courses, particularly because these courses have been passed by constituted faculty committees. So the course went ahead as scheduled in the spring of 2025. And a couple days into the course, it was a seminar, 15 people, there appeared an Israeli graduate student. He told me he was Israeli. I am Jewish myself, and I have a daughter and three grandchildren, plus numerous relatives who are Israelis. So I initially welcomed him into the course, and that's on email. Those emails are public knowledge. And he came to the class. But when he came to the class, he was a graduate student in computer science. When he came to the class, he was very disruptive. And this is testified to by my students in a public letter that they wrote finally in the course of my case. And they complained also to our student services specialist. And his disruption constituted the fact he didn't do the readings in the course. He wasn't engaged in the conversations in the course, which in the first place were about genocide specifically, not specifically about Israel, although Israel was mentioned and the genocide in Gaza, of course, was mentioned. But he was not doing the readings. He was not participating in the course. He was just pushing back against the students' conversation. And he appeared to be recording the course, which is a violation of academic integrity. So, in any event, after 3 days, the students complained to me they were worried, they were being doxed, that he was not there for legitimate reasons. I called him aside, and in a conversation that we had, which he recorded, by the way, without my knowledge, I asked him to leave, please leave the course. And he did leave the course. 3 months later, he filed a complaint, a Title VI complaint, that I had asked him to leave the course because he was Israeli, when that was not the case whatsoever. I asked him to leave the course because he was a disruptive presence in the course. And I knew he was Israeli to begin with anyway. He had told me that. As I said, I have strong ties to Israel. And this was 3 months later. It was a rather delayed complaint. But to make a long story short, the case was finally heard, as it should have been, by the Academic Freedom and Professional Status of the Faculty Committee at Cornell. They are constituted to hear these kinds of cases. And they unanimously, 6-0, found that I had not violated Title VI, that I had not asked him to leave because he was of his identity, his ethnic identity, religious identity. I had asked him to leave because I felt he was disruptive, based on my student complaints and his actions in the course. So that should have been the end of it, because if you read Cornell policy, and this is policy that has been on the books for years, it says that the administration must, and that is the word, accept the findings of this committee, which they have, of course, constituted to hear these cases. And what happened was they did not listen to the committee. They overturned the committee hearing, which goes against Cornell policy, and instituted a new hearing. And that's where the case went. They had recommended a 2-semester suspension without pay. By this time, I had a counsel who was representing me. And so we were prepared to go the whole route here in terms of finally winding up in court, because Cornell was in violation of its own policies. They also canceled my classes for this year, which is a violation of policy, of Cornell's policy and AAUP, American Association of University Professor policy. So they violated policies across the board. But finally, because of strong publicity in my favor and support in my favor both at Cornell and nationally, Cornell came to the table dropped the proceedings that they had instituted in contravention of the Academic Freedom Committee. And we came to the agreement I am now under. The agreement simply said that I would retire in June 2026, which I planned to do anyway, that I would retire with full benefits and I could apply for emeritus status, as is open to all faculty members at Cornell. So the one thing they stopped was that they suspended my classes for this year. I could not teach. They did not want me back in the classroom. And that had been made clear early on in these proceedings. So that's what is the status of my case, and it is not an unusual case. Across the board in American universities, faculty members have been suspended, fired, sanctioned in one way or another, and this has come about because of the context of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, the U.S. support for that genocide, and therefore the attempt to suppress people who are reporting in one way or another or protesting in one way or another that situation.
Yes, and I suppose at this moment I should make it clear that I am no neutral observer in this whole situation, because during the encampments, which was 2024, I think.
Yes.
So before all this, both my husband Wales and we did not actually participate in the encampment. We never went in, but we came when there was a call that, witnesses were needed to prevent possible interference. And a couple of times we brought food. I consider that my biggest contribution.
I did participate in the encampment. I did a teach-in in it, and I was inside it frequently. And I had students who were part of it. I should say that my actions against the graduate student, the Israeli graduate student, had to do with protecting my students. That was my primary goal, and to protect the academic freedom of the classroom, which was being violated by his presence. He was present. I should also say, and this is in the Nation articles, I would recommend two articles in the Nation that reported thoroughly on this that he was a former member of the top Israeli surveillance unit, 8200. So his background suggests, whatever his motives were, his background suggests competence in surveillance. I did not know that at the time. This came out after, actually came out in the Nation articles. So that was not commented on in any of the hearings that I went through, but it did come out in the Nation articles. And I think it's obviously relevant information. Students, of course, were being sanctioned in various ways at Cornell for peacefully protesting, and that had to do with a very draconian expressive activity policy, which is still in effect, which allowed the administration, without due process, to suspend students either academically, which took them out of their curricula trajectories, or non-academically, which allowed them still to come to class but not to be on campus for other reasons, unless the administration approved of it. And policies like this, again, were meant and aimed specifically at pro-Palestinian activity.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I interviewed Nick Wilson, I think one of the members of the encampment. In his case, he was, he's a would-be organizer. And in some ways, Cornell kicking him out was, what was it, throwing the rabbit into the briar patch.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. I
Uh,
understand that figure perfectly. Right. I suppose in many ways that's what they did with me as well. I mean, I've been a long time activist and supporter of, what I consider to be social justice causes. And my scholarship has always been connected to that activism and social justice. I should also say that many of my students, because I'm a former director of the American Indian Indigenous Studies program, are indigenous students who are well aware of the powers of colonization, which are ongoing in the United States. So they were quite sensitive to what I've described.
yes, I think they would be among those who saw the connections. I mean, the other group from whom I have heard more who see parallels are American blacks
Yes,
who go to Palestine, have come back and said, "This is very familiar. This is
right,
Jim Crow. We call it Jim Crow here."
right, right. Well, Israel is definitely now, and I think it has been actually historically an apartheid state. So Jim Crow dovetails, of course, with apartheid.
I think there is one question. We've seen all the kind of the funny connections, but what is the importance of the case in both a local and a global context?
Yeah. Well, it's an academic freedom faculty governance case. And this is a global situation. Across the board, academics have been sanctioned in one way or another for exercising their academic freedom in talking about the Palestinian Israeli interaction from a Palestinian perspective, for talking about the genocide, protesting against the genocide. Two things should be noted here. There has been a radical decline in tenure track jobs in academia over the last 30 to 40 years. Only 23% now of the faculties across the board are tenured, and only 9% are tenure track. And this points to a situation where tenure is disappearing. It is still Ivy League schools, including Cornell, are predominantly tenured, but that's the case in a very few elite schools now. And this makes, of course, activities like faculty governance, rules of faculty governance, shared governance, very difficult to maintain if you do not have a predominantly tenured faculty who are protected in one way or should be protected. Clearly, tenure itself is no longer a protection. Thomas Alter will be coming to Cornell later in the semester. He was fired at Texas Tech, a tenured history professor, because of his socialist statements off campus. He didn't even speak about the Palestinian Gaza issue, which is the hot button issue, but he spoke about the need for socialist reforms in the United States, which is certainly true. I certainly support that wholeheartedly. And he was fired, a tenured professor. So tenure now is vulnerable. It is vulnerable because it's only 23% of the faculty is tenured across the board. So this case is important because it is one of many cases in which faculty academic freedom, faculty governance has been subverted by administrations acting in the interests of what I take to be a sort of rationalization, a governmental rationalization of the genocide in Gaza. It should be said, and it's important, is what has happened to anti-Semitism. Early on in 2023, after October 7th, there was a committee hearing, the Education and Workforce Committee, chaired by Virginia Foxx, a Republican. This was under the Biden administration. And the Biden administration itself added to what I call the weaponization, and others call the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which was the extension of anti-Semitism not to a simple racist context, which is what historic anti-Semitism is. In other words, hating Jews for being Jews, hating blacks for being black, hating Latinos for being Latina, et cetera, et cetera. It was an extension into a criticism of Zionism, which is a political movement, and Israel. So that comments that were critical of Israel, and Israel's a Zionist state, and of Zionism for the situation in Gaza, for the genocide in Gaza, were being typed as anti-Semitism. And this, of course, undermined First Amendment and academic freedom expressions. One of the primary clauses in the First Amendment is that viewpoint discrimination is not allowed. In other words, you cannot pick out a particular kind of speech and then condemn that speech or declare it illegal. But this is what was going on. So the Workforce Committee, Education and Workforce, called before it, I think everybody remembers this, the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and MIT, and roundly condemned them for allowing anti-Semitism on their campuses.
Now, when was this?
This was in December of 2023.
So under Biden.
This was under Biden. Yeah, it was a Republican committee. The Congress was Republican, but it was under Biden that this took place. And Biden was fully supporting, obviously, the genocide. The United States was basically implementing, allowing that genocide through the shipment of arms to Israel. So Biden completely supported this weaponization of anti-Semitism. And this committee called these three presidents before it and condemned them roundly for allowing anti-Semitism on their campuses without any proof. But what they were defining anti-Semitism is, although they never defined it in that committee, and the professors, the presidents, who are also professors, the presidents of these universities never asked for it to be defined, which I found to be astounding, actually, from academics not asking a term to be defined, which is used to condemn them. They actually bent the knee for the most part to this committee. And the committee was using a definition which is now very, very visible, the IHRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates at points critique of Israel and Zionism with anti-Semitism. This definition had been officially adopted by 20 universities already in 2020. Congress has adopted it officially, passed an act, not Congress, excuse me, the House of Representatives passed an act officially proclaiming this definition to be the definition of anti-Semitism that the federal government used. The Senate has not passed it, so it is not law at this point. But that weaponization of anti-Semitism was used to undermine academic freedom across the board. It has been used, continually being used across the board. And so that means that people actually criticizing Israel or criticizing Zionism are now being typed as anti-Semites, even though many of these people, including myself, of course, are Jews. Not all Jews are pro-Israel or pro-Zionist. In fact, the bulk majority of them are not across the country, 14 million Jewish people, right? So the definition itself is kind of anti-Semitic. Because it stereotypes Jews as having to be pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. And that is a definition that was used by the protocols of the elders of Zion in the beginning of the 20th century to stereotype Jews. So here we are in a situation where Jews are being condemned for being Jews and for acting in a Jewish tradition. This is a tradition I come out of social justice, the tradition of the prophets. And I've written extensively about that tradition. So I think that's the full context in which it's being operated. And consequently, organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace are considered by the federal government and by universities implicitly or explicitly as anti-Semitic. And I can you see the irony in that, as everybody should see the irony in
Yes,
that.
it's ridiculous. I mean, that term anti-Semitism to me is totally meaningless because it means so many different things to so many different people. And sorry, but the House of Representatives does not create dictionaries.
Right. But it is attempting to do that. That I think is what is particularly dangerous. Right. Anti-Semitism, the question is, this everybody the people pushing this IHRA definition are claiming a rise in anti-Semitism. But it's very hard now to talk about a rise in anti-Semitism when the definition of anti-Semitism has been opened up precisely to critiques of Israel and Zionism. A poll was taken by the administration at Cornell about Jewish safety, because a lot of this also has weaponized safety. And over 80% of the Jews at Cornell who were interviewed, I don't know who they were, said they felt perfectly safe. So in effect, this is a total fiction that's being created in order to silence people. And it has an intimidating effect, given the status of tenure and given the vulnerability of staff and adjunct professors and students. It has really had, unfortunately, a very, very repressive effect. People are intimidated. They're afraid to speak out, not simply about Gaza, but about anything that might be considered controversial. So the Alter case is a good case in point. I mean, he was never talked about Gaza or Palestine, as far as I know, but just talking about socialism. The Trump administration, of course, claims there are only two genders. So now in gender studies classes across the country, some of them are forced and constrained, right, to try to talk about gender within a completely binary framework, when we know that, of course, gender is a non-binary issue. So it's had a chilling effect, and I think it's gone a long way to undermining the academic mission. I mean, unless you have academic freedom, you cannot teach. It is impossible to teach without academic freedom. And I think what Trump has done, the Trump administration has done, is use the weaponization of anti-Semitism as an alibi to attack liberal education. And I think that's what's being done. These people, they themselves are anti-Semites, many of them, traditional anti-Semites.
In the more traditional sense.
Yes, in the traditional sense. So they could care less, I think, about Jews as Jews, but they have used this weapon as a wedge against liberal education, and it has really had a dampening and damning effect on teaching, both in the primary and secondary schools, and colleges and universities.
Well, I think one maybe hopeful reaction to all this has been that more and more academics turn to unions for
Yes,
protection.
yes. Yeah, I think unions are the future. I wrote a piece that came out in Counterpunch a while back called The Collapse of the Corporate University in the Time of Gaza, and pointing to the reduction in tenure and tenure track jobs, their virtual disappearance. I think unions are the thing that is going to across the board. Unfortunately, now private universities, because of the 1980 Yeshiva decision, Supreme Court decision, cannot unionize. They were adjudged, the faculty in private universities were adjudged to be of the managerial staff. But that certainly has changed radically with if it was ever true, with the diminishment of tenure and the status of most faculties. So private universities should be able to organize. Whether
Well,
that
I
will
think they
happen,
do. I mean, Cornell faculty is now in AAUP, and AAUP has become something
yeah,
like a union.
yeah, but it is not a union, and of course, most of the faculty is not in AAUP. I think we have about 200 members now. So if you have a union, then everybody joins that union typically, and you have a much stronger force of people who recognize themselves as workers in a corporate situation.
Yes. Thank you, Eric Cheyfitz. This has been very interesting, both your own case and the broader implications for academia and academic freedom. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.